Hello and welcome to Daf Shevui. This is our first video from Masechet Kiddushin. We are beginning to learn the Masechet this week. I am Josh Kulp. Just a couple words about Daf Shevui because we had a tremendous amount of people joining this week, both on the email list and on the Facebook group. So first of all, if you are not on the Daf Shevui Facebook group and you are on Facebook, please join the Facebook group because that's the best way to have discussion. Talmud is meant to be learned with a chavruta, with a partner, in a community. And since we're all learning virtually, it's hard for us all to get together, but we can do it through the wonders of Facebook. I would hope that as we learn, we get a more lively discussion group going there. And I always try to answer questions as promptly as possible. Nearly every day I go on there to check to see if there are any messages. So the other thing about Daf Shevui is every week we have a video. It usually goes out on the first day. I tend to give introductions to the Daf, but sometimes I go deeper into a particular issue. And in this first Daf of Kiddushin, I wanted to talk about the nature of this first Daf. It is a peculiar page of Talmud. Most of the Talmud is not interested in the kinds of things that are interested in this page. This page is particularly interested in some of the nuances of the language and not the content of the halacha, of the laws of the Mishnah. It asks questions such as, why does it say a woman is acquired, ha'isha niknet, as opposed to ha'ish mekadesh, a man betrothed? In other words, why use the passive and the woman is acquired as opposed to the man betrothed? And then it begins to ask questions about why does it use the word derech, way, in three ways, as opposed to with three things. It asks the question why we use the word three and two, and it's particularly interested in some of the language which has very little it doesn't generate new halachot. There are no Amoraic discussions, no Tanaitic discussions on this very first page. It's all just an exposition of the particular nuances of the Hebrew in the Mishnah. And so another thing that's very interesting to note about this page is that perhaps due to its special nature, from the Gaonic period and onward, which is the period between, let's say, 700 and 1000, it's called the Gaonic period because the leaders of the rabbinic community and perhaps also of the Jewish people were called Gaonim, which at the time was a description of the head of an academy. In the Gaonic period, there was one of the most famous Gaonim who lived in the end of the Gaonic period. His name is Rav Shira Gaon. And Rav Shira Gaon was sent a question from somewhere in North Africa, and they asked him, he was living in Babylonia, where most of the Gaonim lived, and they asked him, will you write for us a history of the rabbis? Where does all this come from? Who wrote this stuff? Give us a little history. And he's the first person to actually write a history of the rabbinic period. And he goes all the way from the Mishnah, from the rabbis of the Mishnah, to the end of the Talmud, and then continues to describe the history of his own period, the leaders of the academies in Babylonia. And he, for the first time in Jewish history, describes, and perhaps the only time really, describes a period between the Talmudic period and what we would call the Gaonic period. He calls these rabbis Savoraim. In other words, in his division of the history of the rabbis, there's Tanaim, those in the Mishnah, Amoraim, those in the Talmud, Savoraim, who mostly come after the Talmud, and then Geonim, were the rabbis of his period. He ascribes several passages in the Talmud to people whom he identifies as Savoraim, and he particularly says that this introduction to Masechet Kiddushin is from the Savoraic period. In other words, it was appended to the Talmud after the major core of the Talmud was produced. And most scholars have accepted that as historically accurate. We don't really know much about this period. We don't know many names of the rabbis who lived there. We don't really know what they were doing. Many scholars, including myself, suspect that this was a period in which they were intensely editing the Talmud. And you may hear me use the word stamaim, the anonymous voice of the Talmud, and the difference, if there is such a thing, between Stamaim, the anonymous voice of the Talmud, and the Savoraim, these rabbis who lived after the Talmud. It's not clear that there even is such a difference. In my opinion, there really isn't. But it's a daf of Talmud that is really very different than most other dapim of the Talmud. I think you'll see that if you've learned Talmud before. Not to worry if these particulars of the dikduk, of the grammar of language, bore you a little bit. No. It's the beginning of the movie. There's more to come. I promise you it'll get more exciting. Don't judge the book by its opening pages. It is a very interesting Masechet, and we're going to have a great time learning it. Yashar koach on joining, and I'm looking forward to learning with all of you.